Today's stuff we're going to be learning is Bava Metzia Daf Kaf Gimel. Today's stuff is sponsored in memory of Rav Moshe ben David, Rav Moshe Feinstein Zatzal. Today's stuff is sponsored by Terry Kravosha for Refuah Shlema for her husband, Chaim Herring, Rav Chaim Yehuda ben Sipora. Okay, we're going to get started. I want to mention that we've had for 2 years in running the beginner's Gemara, the complete guide to Gemara. We are now running one in Hebrew this year. So if you know anybody who's interested, you can pass it along to them if you'd like to join. Also, it's starting on April 1st with Karen Rosenberg, and it'll be a 3-part series, just like Rabbanit Leasarnas was, and highly recommended, good background course. So if you know people who are interested, please let them know. And if you want to join, you're welcome to join. It'll be like the other one where it'll be all available digitally after. It'll be on Monday night starting April 1st for 3 weeks. So a nice new program we are having. Okay, we're now going to get started with half bet. I'm a bet toward the bottom, about 7 lines for the bottom, the words tashma, tafshin. So tashma, we're now in the middle of this machloket. There's a study guide for today. It's pretty short, but it has a few small charts that might help you out. We have basically a machloket between Rava and Raba. Okay, it's always confusing when we have machlokot between them. Rava is the one who ends his name with an aleph. Raba ends it with a hey. And we're going to have a debate between them on 2 issues right now, which is location. This is where we ended yesterday. The location of where you find something, can that count as a siman? Today, our main topic really is siman, identifiable features. How do we figure out what is an identifiable feature that will allow you to collect your item? And really, it's not even so much about you getting to collect your item. It's really about that's the basis. But it's if I find something in a particular place, does that mean, even though it has no identifiable markings on it, do I have to announce it because someone could say, oh, I left it specifically in that spot? Or if I have if I see something on the street and it has an identifiable mark, but if it's likely people are going to step on it, then basically, again, it all depends on, right? Do you think you'll ever get it back? Now, if people step on it and if people are going to trample on it and it'll ruin it, then that's not really an identifiable mark, or is it, right? Are we not worried that you'll think, oh, someone will step on my item and therefore maybe it is a siman still? So these are issues that Rava and Raba are grappling with. Rava with a hey thinks that neither of these is a siman, and Rava with an aleph thinks that they're both simanim. So now we have a braita that we're going to have to figure out. Now the braita, the first halach in the braita we've seen in our Mishna, and it'll be in the next Mishna, but the second part not, and we're going to have to figure this out. So we have these bundles of wheat. Okay, the way I understand it, more like a bale of hay, something like that, because we'll see where it's going to be compared to alumot. Alumot are bundles like the way you see on Shavuot. There's always these big stalks of wheat, and they're tall, and you can bundle them, and they can stand up, because we're going to see that's one of the differences they're going to claim about them. The one is standing up, and one is on the ground. So krichot, we're going to compare krichot to alumot. Again, it's a little hard because we don't really know the differences, and whether the people in the Gemara who are discussing this also knew exactly what that meant is also a question. But they're going to try to define what are the differences between them to explain why this braita is going to distinguish between krichot and alumot. So krichot, so for me, the easiest way to imagine it was these bales of hay, on the ground, and then, or bales of, or sheaves, like standing up, bundled up together, though they're not in the ground, they're detached. Obviously, if they were attached to the ground, we would know whose they are because they were in somebody's field. So the krichot, which are the ones probably lying on the ground, those, right, you have piles of bundles on the ground, those, it all depends. If it's in the public domain, you can take them. If it's in a private domain, you have to leave them. But alumot, the stalks, bain, or the sheaves, bain bereshut harabim, bain bereshut yachid, no telu machriz. No matter what, you have to return them. So now the big question is going to be why. And what does this have to do with machloket Raba and Rava? So Raba hechi mitaritzla, Rava hechi mitaritzla. How are each of these going to explain the difference between the krichot and the alumot? So Raba mitaritzla tamei b'siman. Okay, Raba is going to explain it has to do with, it's a case where there is a siman. Okay, and then we'll see, because remember, his whole distinction is it asur lidares or not. If it's going to be trampled, it's not a siman. If it is not going to be trampled, then it is a siman. So he's going to explain the whole thing that way. And Rava mitaretz l'tamei b'makom. And Rava is going to explain the whole thing his way. It all depends on location. Is location a way of, a method as Rava thinks you can announce based on where it was, but depending on the scenario, and we'll see. So right now we didn't really understand anything yet. Rava mitaretz l'tamei b'siman. How is that? Okay, so the first one is pretty easy to explain. You have these bundles in the public domain, people are going to trample them. And therefore, what does Rava say? If people are going to step on them, even if it had an identifiable marking on it, you don't have to return it because the owner assumes it will get trampled and then it won't be a siman anymore. But if it's in a private domain, there aren't that many people passing by, it's not going to get trampled and therefore notelu machriz. Therefore, you have to return it. Delo midrasa, because it won't get trampled. V'ha'alumot, now we have to explain why are alumot different from krichot. No matter what, you have to announce. Why is that? Well, what do people step on? People step on things that are on the floor, low down to the ground. Tall bundles that are standing up, no one's going to step on them. You'd have to pick up your leg very high to actually trample them. So because of that, and that's how I knew they were high, because the Gemara told us they were high. Again, that's why I say, I know they're high because the Gemara said they were high, and that's how they resolved this contradiction. Whether it was actually true in the time of the Mishna, that those terms really meant what they claim they meant, we don't really know. But we're assuming that that's the difference. Rava mitaretz l'tamei b'makom. How so? So now, remember, there's no siman on these at all, according to Rava. There is no siman. If there was a siman, for sure you'd have to return them even in the public domain, because he thinks that if it's going to be trampled, it doesn't matter. It's still a siman right now. So now the question is, the only siman for him is there's no identifiable mark, but perhaps the location can function as an identifiable mark. So now we have to come up with what's the difference between krichot and alumot. Why krichot in public? We know why not, because that's already what we talked about before. Because they're going to get moved from place to place. People are going to kick them, as opposed to trampling on them. People just knock them over. Animals knock them, move them. So that's what we're going to see right now. I could leave them in one spot, but I'm not going to find them in that spot. Because they get dragged along by people's. They roll, from one place to another. But in the private domain, that doesn't happen because there aren't so many people. It doesn't get kicked around. If I say I left them in that spot, I know exactly where I left them, and that's where I'm assuming they're going to be. So again, I don't have yeush. I want to get my item back, which means that you have a responsibility to return it. And I have a way to get it back because I could say I left it right there. Alumot, now we're going to have to explain that alumot don't move in public or private. Why not? Not because they're tall, but a different reason. Alumot, bein b'reshut harabi and bein b'reshut yachid, notel machriz. Why? Kevandi yakire lo minshtafa. Apparently, they are heavier. So because they're heavier, again, another difference, which I wouldn't necessarily know, but they claim alumot are heavier. Because they're heavier, they don't get kicked around. Okay, and therefore, they'll be in the same location. So we now resolve that source according to both Raba and Rava. We read it differently. Tashma. Now we're going to bring a question on one of the opinions. It says in our Mishna, Hikarot shel nachtom hare'elu shelo. Bakery, bought, right? A bread from a bakery, go to a bakery, right? Most of them have it's very hard to identify the difference between them. They all kind of look the same. So, hare'elu shelo, you find that in the street, you can take it. Now, what's the inference from here? If it was baked by you, everybody knows your challahs look different than someone else's challahs. So those you would have to announce. This is a very strange Gemara, by the way, because you didn't need to infer this from our Mishnah. You could have just quoted the next Mishnah. I know you didn't read the next Mishnah, but the next Mishnah says exactly this line. So perhaps there's different versions of this Gemara. I didn't check, but it would have been a more obvious question to say, but the other Mishnah says, chayav lachriz. Either which way, it's still the case, whether it's from an inference from our Mishnah or it's from the next Mishnah. Either which way, it's obvious that if it's privately baked bread, then you would have to announce it. Now, what's the problem with this? Where did you find this bread? In the street, right? Now, what did Rava say? Rava said with a hey. Rava said, if it's going to be trampled, then you don't have to, it's not a siman anymore. So shabalabaya, my timer, kevan de ipu siman, right? And that's why do we assume you have to announce it? Because there has some marking, identifiable feature. Everybody knows what your bread looks like. And it then should, right, doesn't matter. Right? The Mishnah didn't say specifically in the private domain, so we assume this is even in the public domain. Alma simana siman tiyufta de Raba. This would basically knock out Rabba's shita because it's saying bread in the public domain, people will step on it. Because they'll step on it, and we still have to announce it, that means it's still a siman, even though it could be stepped on. Amar lecha Rabba could answer the following. People step on lots of things in the public domain, but they don't step on food. Okay? People have respect for food. They don't step on food. Well, you're going to ask a few questions on this. First of all, who doesn't step on food? So they're saying Jewish people have a certain amount of respect for food. They don't step on it. But there's Gentiles. They might step on food. So again, if you drop your homemade challah in the public domain, you assume, even though everyone knows that challah is your challah, but you assume it's going to be trampled on, so you have yeyush. Because even if the Jews don't trample on it, well, other people walk in the street besides Jews. So what about the Gentiles? Well, they have their own reasons why they don't step on bread. They don't step on bread because they're worried about witchcraft. It's like a superstitious thing. Now, obviously, all Gentiles don't worry about this kind of witchcraft. But in those days, obviously, the place where they were living, the majority of the people were probably of, a certain, could be they were Persians. There's a lot of the witchcraft of the Persians coming up in the Gemara. Or the Zoroastrians, actually, the Parsim, which are the Zoroastrians. Maybe they're talking about them, which was a big part of the population where they were living, and they didn't step on food either for other reasons. Now comes the more obvious question: Ha'ika behemau klavin. But right, I mean, we learned Bava Kama. There's a lot of animals walking around. There's animals. There's dogs. What are we going to do about them? Well, a funny answer. We're talking about a place where there aren't a lot of animals or dogs. Okay, first of all, a few questions. Why are animals listed separately from dogs? Why that's the distinction, I don't know. And imagine, right, it's hard to imagine in those days there weren't places where there were animals and dogs. And then we're basically having to say, in order to explain Rabba, we're going to have to say our Mishna is referring to only cases where there really aren't animals around. Okay, now this concept of people not stepping on food is going to continue here. And what we're going to do right now, and this is the confusing part of today's sugya. After this is pretty easy going. But this part of the sugya is a little complicated. To me, it's a bit like a mathematical equation, okay, even though there's no math here. But it's more like algebra. We're going to change, there's going to be certain variables, certain things that stay the same, and certain things that are variables. Okay, and then we're going to switch which are the variables and which are the constants. So, lema kitanai, right now we're introducing this as, and we're going to have, the reason why it's going to be even more complicated is we're going to have the sugya twice. We're going to have two different versions of the sugya. Version number one starts off by suggesting, let's go back for a minute to the Mishna, okay? There's a machloket in the Mishna which we haven't really explained yet, which is after we list all the things that you don't have to return according to Rabbi Meir. Then Rabbi Yehuda comes and says, Kol sheyesh bo shinoi chayav lachriz. Rabbi Yehuda seems to disagree with Rabbi Meir. We don't really know about what. That's going to be our whole question. And says, if there's some sort of difference, though, some sort of change in the item, you have to announce it. Ketzad. So here's an example in the Mishnah. Matzah igulu b'tochol cheres. You have one of those fig cakes, and in the middle is a shard, an earthenware shard. Tikara b'tochol ma'ot. You find bread, and there's money inside. So what's the machloket Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir? Right now the Gemara is going to say, Lema ketanai. Maybe it's exactly the machloket between Raba and Rava about siman hasoili dareis havi siman or not. Okay, you might say, how so? Well, we'll have to see. So Lema ketanai. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. And what we're going to do is we're then going to reject it. And first, we're going to suggest, and if you get the structure from the beginning, it might help you understand, so you don't get lost in the ins and outs. But it's not so complicated; it's just a little confusing. So we're going to have suggestion that maybe it's the machloket, Raba and Rava. One holds like Rabbi Meir, one holds like Rabbi Yehuda. We're going to call Rabbi Meir Tanakama, the first Tana, even though he's called Rabbi Meir in the Mishnah, but they're going to call him Tanakama. And then we're going to say, no. Rava is going to read the Mishnah like this, and Rava is going to read the Mishnah like that. Okay, or Rava first, then Rava. Okay, we're then going to say that's not the machloket. Each one's going to think the machloket between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda is something else. That's going to be the whole first reading. And then we'll get to the second reading. I'll go with that. I'll explain it again from the beginning. So let's suggest that this is a machloket tanim. Now we're going to read Rabbi Yehuda, which I just read. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, kol davar sheyesh bo shinoi chayav lachriz. Anything with a change, you have to announce. Ketzam tzai gula b'tochol cheres, kikar b'tochol ma'ot. Okay, that's the case. You found something inside. Michlal de Tanakama savar hare elu shelo. Now the assumption is the Tanakama, which is Rabbi Meir, must disagree with Rabbi Yehuda. Otherwise, it would have just been listed as Rabbi Meir. Now Savrua, we're now going to say that there's three factors here. And then we're going to say they all agree about one, they all agree about two, and they disagree about three. And then we're going to change later. When we reject this, we're going to say, no. Factor three, they actually all agree, either this or that, and they're going to change one of the other factors, okay? So let's go through. They thought, when they suggested that the machloket between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda is the exact same machloket as Raba and Rava, which, by the way, could be a positive thing, like say, oh, look, you two Tanaim, you're actually debating something that people debated earlier. Or it could be a negative thing. It could be, why are you debating something that already, right? In other words, don't say something that has already been said and saying maybe that's a problem. It doesn't make sense that they'd be arguing over something that was already debated years before them. So that's another possibility. It's a good way to look at when you have a lema ketanai. Is it a good thing? Is it a bad thing? Right? Is it a question? Almost like, isn't this a Tanaitic debate? In which case, what are you doing arguing about this? So, okay. Anyway, that's an aside. Let's read. Everybody thought the siman haba me'elav have a siman. Now we have a new thing. Siman haba me'elav. What's siman haba me'elav? A siman haba me'elav is a siman like an earthenware shard in the middle of your fig cake, or money in the middle of your bread. That's not something you put in. It's something that happened on its own. Now, if I find an item with a money in, we don't really eat fig cakes so much, so let's go with money in a roll. Okay, there's money in the middle of this piece of bread. Now, is this a siman? Well, first of all, it definitely makes it different than all the other breads. On the other hand, do you even know that happened? Do I have to assume that it's a siman haba me'elav? It's not something you put in. If you put it in, right, like I'm thinking always of when I learned this thing of the key challahs, people who put the keys in the challahs, you put that in, okay, I understand. But if fell in, you might not even have any idea that it's there. So when I'm the finder, do I have to assume this is a siman or not? So that, everyone agrees it is a siman. That's called a siman haba me'elav. It's not a siman that I placed there. It's a siman that happened to have gotten there. According to this reading, that's a siman. And people step on food. Okay, we're now going to talk about this issue. According to this understanding, we assume that people do step on food. Why do we want that to be? Because we want to say the whole machloket is ha'im siman asoli dareis have a siman, something that gets stepped on. So number one, it's a siman. Number two, people step on it. So now we go back to, okay, there is a siman, people step on it. Now the big question becomes, and the debate between them is, well, since people step on it, do we still consider that a siman or not? And that's this machloket between Raba and Rava. And that's going to be the machloket here between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir. So my la b'siman asoli dareis kamiflage, mar savar lo avisiman, or mar savar havisiman. So our whole purpose of establishing the first two stages was to say this is a siman, because it's the siman haba me'elav is a siman, but people trample on it because everyone agrees that people do step on food. Okay, that's option number one. You can see how we can then change it. Oh no, maybe the machloket is, maybe they both agree about, right? There's like A, B, and C. So right now we said A and B, they all agree about, C they disagree about. Now we're going to change it and say, no. Maybe they all disagree about A. Maybe B and C are stable, but they all disagree about A. And then the question is, where are B and C stable? Stable on what opinion? Okay, so let's see. So the first suggestion is, it is a siman. It's just a matter of, since it will get trampled, do we still consider that a siman or not? And that's what Rabbi Yehuda says, right? Rabbi Yehuda says, if it has this marking, then you have to announce it because we still view it as a siman. That's like Rava with an aleph. And Rabbi Meir says no. But comes Rav Zvid, and now Rav Zvid, in the rejection of this, is going to say, how would Rava read this? As siman asoli dareis is a siman, and both Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda agree about that. And how would Rabba read it, who thinks a siman asoli dareis is not a siman? And how can then you have a machloket? So again, we're going to change some of the other factors, or one of the other factors. So Amar Rav Zvid mishmei de Rava, Isa kadata. So first of all, we're going to say why this can't be. Okay, before we even get to reinterpreting. Rav Zvid in the name of Rava is going to say the following. If you say that Savar Tanakama Siman Asur Lidares Lo Havi Siman Umavirin Ala Ochlin, if you think people step on food, and you think that Rabbi Meir holds that because you step on it, it's no longer a siman, and that's why, well, then we're going to have a problem with the next Mishnah, which says, If you find homemade bread, what did we say? You have to announce it. Now, if people step on food, and once people step on it, it's not identifiable, then Tanakama makes no sense according to this interpretation. Because why would you have to announce bread, your homemade bread? People step on it, and once it's trampled, it's not a siman anymore. You wouldn't have to. So therefore, Ela Amrav Zvid, so therefore we reject that possibility. Okay? Can't be that that's the machloket. So here comes Rav Zvid Mishmei to Rava and explains it according to Rava. Everybody thinks if it's going to get trampled, it is a siman. And mavirin ala ochlin, and people step on them. So basically, now this neutralizes the other, because we don't care if people step on food, because in any case, it's still a siman, because this is Rava who thinks that that is a siman. So it is a siman. So now the question is, well, what's the machloka between them then? And now we change factor A from the previous, which is, is this even a siman or not, though? Because the money fell into the bread. Do you even know that the money fell into your bread? The Tanakama says that's not a siman. We don't even think you know that that's the case. So it's not an identifiable marking. And Rabbi Yehuda savar havi siman. And Rabbi Yehuda thinks it is. So that's how Rava, who thinks that a siman asur lidares is still going to be a siman. The machloket here is, do we even count this as a siman or not? Raba amar lecha, and here comes Rav Zvid, and he says, and Raba will say, de kule alma, now we have to say the reverse, which is everyone thinks siman asur lidares is not a siman, because that's Raba. If it's going to get trampled, lo havi siman, that is not a siman. But why is that not a factor here? Because ein mavirin ala ochlin, but people don't step on food. Okay, so we're switching the first two. The assumption we just made about, right, according to Rava with an aleph, again, you have to think what's motivating them to say this. He thinks siman asur lidares is still a siman. So you have to say that he holds that way. In which case you can say people do step on food. It is going to get trampled, but who cares? It's still a siman. The whole debate must be, is this a siman at all, though, because maybe the owner doesn't even know it, the money fell in. So now we're going to get to the same conclusion according to Rabba, but in a different manner, because we're going to have to say, according to Rabba, siman asur lidares is not a siman anymore. So you'd have to have a case where this is a siman, though. So you'd have to say, oh, but people don't step on food. So both Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda agree nobody steps on food, so even if it gets trampled, we don't care because this won't get trampled. What's the debate then? Right? So again, let's read it inside. Everyone agrees, which means if there was a siman here, it would be a siman because people don't step on food. So what's the machloket? Is this a siman at all or not? So both Rava and Raba agree that the machloket is this thing that falls in, do we consider that a siman at all or not? Tanakama savar lo havi siman, Rabbi Yehuda savar havi siman. The debate between, right, the two ways you have to understand it, though, is based on whether they hold siman asur lidares is a siman or not a siman. Well, that has to affect whether you say people step on food or don't step on food. And then we either which way, we have to get to a point where this is a siman that will matter if it's a siman. The question is, between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda, is this even a siman? Because it's a siman abba me'elav. So in simple terms, we could just say like this. Okay, if it's a little confusing, the whole back and forth. But we tried to say the whole debate between them is a siman asur lidares have a siman or not. If it's going to get trampled, is it a siman or not? In the end, we said, no, that's not the issue because of the problem with the kikarop al habayit. How could we say kikarop al habayit, your own homemade bread, you have to return when there's no identifiable feature once it gets trampled, right? According to that opinion, it would make no sense if you say that's what Tanakama says. And Tanakama doesn't hold with the next Mishnah. So we basically, in the end, say the whole machloket is whether you're Rabba, whether you're Rava, and hold what you hold about siman asur lidares and whether people step on food or not. Either which way, we get to a place where there is a siman. The question is, right, if it was going to get trampled or it just won't get trampled at all. But The whole question is, since this fell in, is it a siman or is it not a siman? Okay, so we move from saying the machloket is siman asuli dares to it's a siman haba me'elav. That's the debate between them. Is that even a siman or is it not a siman? Now, to get more confusing, we're now going to say that the whole issue in the second version, some people say that they didn't try to say a siman asuli dares is the machloket between the same machloket Raba Rava, the same machloket Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir. That's not where they started. Now we had three factors, and notice we only each time we had either it's siman asuli dares or it's siman haba me'elav. Nobody said there was a debate about whether people step on food or not. Now we're going to start that's the debate. And then, so stage one is going to suggest maybe the whole debate is, do people step on food or not? Okay? And they all agree that if you step on it, it won't be a siman. The question is just, do people step on food or do they not step on food? And then we're going to reject it in the exact same way. So the second part where Rav Zvi comes in is going to be identical to the way it was in the first sugya. And in the end, say the debate is not mavirin ala ochlin, the debate is siman haba me'elav. Okay, and no one's going to suggest here that the debate is a siman asuli dares. Okay, so it's really going to be a repeat, but in a bit of a different way. So ika da amri. Savrua de kule ama siman haba me'elav habi siman. Everyone agrees a siman haba me'elav. We're starting off at the end. Ma'ot in money in the roll is a siman. And siman asuli dares lo habi siman. And everyone agrees here, Rabbi Meir, Rabbi Yehuda, that if it's going to get trampled, that's not a siman anymore. So now, the whole question is what? Will this item get trampled? So it is a siman. It's just a question of will it get trampled? And that's all the debate about. Do people step on food or not? But my lab mavirin ala ochlin kamiflage, demar savar mavirin, umar savar ein mavirin. So again, Tanakama who says, right, let's start with Rabbi Yehuda because he's clear. He says, if you find this, you have to announce it. Why do you have to announce it? Because it's a siman. Because people don't step on food. Okay, and Tanakama is going to say, what do you mean? People step on food. And once they step on food, non-identifiable feature, you don't have to return this. So, Amar Rav Zvid, Mishmei de Rava. Now we're going to have the rejection of this. No. Isal kadata Tanakama, Savar Tanakama, siman asuli dares lo havi siman. Umavirin ala ochlin. In other words, if you're going to say, here we come with the problem, and it's the same problem with the previous, which is if you're going to say that Tanakama says, if it gets trampled, it's not a siman. And people step on food, because that's what we said, right? That he's going to say people do step on food. Okay? So again, the rabbis say people step on food, and because they step on food, this is not a siman. So, and that's why you don't have to announce it. Well, kikarocha balabayit, rishid rabim, amay machris, same problem as before. If it's not going to be a siman by stepping on it, and you assume people step on food, then the homemade bread is not going to be a siman, right? And you're not going to have to announce it. And it says in the Mishna you do. So because of that, Rav Zvid says that's not the answer. The debate is not people step on food or do they not step on food because of that problem. El Am Rav Zvid Mishmei de Rava, and now it's word for word what Rav Zvid came and said last time. Kule Amasavar Siman Asuli Dares Havi Siman. We're now explaining according to Rava. Rava holds, even if it's going to get trampled, it's still a siman. And Mavirin ala ochlin. And you have to say, in order to make that work, well, people do step on food, but we don't care that people step on food because it's still going to be a siman anyway. And the whole debate is siman haba me'elav kamiflage. Is it a siman at all, though, when you have an earthenware shard in your iguleit vela, or when you have, right? Is that even a siman? Tanakama savar siman haba me'elav lo havi siman. Tanakama says that's not a siman. And Rabbi Yehuda savar havi siman. And Rabba amar l'cha, how's Rabba going to explain? Rabba is going to say, "Dekule ama siman asuli dares lo havi siman." Well, it won't be a siman if it's trampled, but don't worry because this food won't get trampled because everyone agrees, "Ein mavirin ala ochlin." We don't step on food. And hacha b'siman haba me'elav kamiflage. And then again, he holds like Rabba that at the end, the machloka between Rabbi Yehuda and Rabbi Meir is this weird kind of siman. Do we count that as a siman or not? Tanakama savar siman haba me'elav lo havi siman. Rabbi Yehuda savar havi siman. Okay, so in the end, to summarize this section, we basically, in option number one, we thought that maybe the machloket is siman asuli dares havi siman or not, and then said, oh, great, or maybe terrible. But either which way, it's the exact same debate that Raba and Rava are having is found in a Tannaitic source. Rejected that because of the kikarocha balabayit, and then said, no, the machloket's about siman haba me'elav. and Rava his way and Rava his way. Then we did the exact same thing, but instead of saying the Tana'id debate with siman asur l'dereis, we switched the other issue, which was the mavirin ala ochlim. So do people step on food or do they not step on food? Okay, and then we said, and that was all assuming that you hold that if people step on it, right, then it won't be a siman anymore. If people don't step on it, then we don't care that a siman asur l'dereis is not a siman because no one's going to step on it, and that was the debate. And then we said, no. And when we go back to saying, no, the debate is all about this weird kind of siman, a siman haba me'elav. Is that a siman or not? I know it's dizzying and I know it's confusing. I tried to organize it as best as I can. Amar Rav Zviv mishmei de Rava. Now, since Rav Zviv was talking before, he's going to continue talking and talk about some other things about avedot. Now, until now, we talked about yeush. Okay, and this is part of the problem. We don't really know what yeush means. Like, what did you do? Did you say, I'll never get this back again? You have to say those words. So Rav Zviv says you really don't have to say those words. Klala de avedata, the general rule is, kevan de amar vail ala chesron kis. If you say, wow, too bad about my lost money, too bad about the money, too bad about my loss, that already is miyayish lemine. That is yeush. Va'amar Rav Zviv mishmei de Rava. And another thing he says, hilchata krichot b'reshut rabim hare'elu shelo b'reshut yachid. So now these bundles we talked about before, like a bail, okay? So if you have them in the public domain, obviously you see them, you can keep them. In the private domain, it really depends, he says. I derech nifila, okay, if it fell, now he's talking according to Rava. Rava says, now there's no identifiable mark here, but it's the location. So now he's going to say, well, it depends where it fell in Reshut Yachid. If it fell or how it got there. If it fell, then you have no idea where it fell. Okay, we're assuming you were walking, it fell, you were carrying a bunch of things, it fell. You have no idea where it fell, so you can't use location as a siman. And therefore, harei elu shelo, you can take them if you find them like that. Iderech hanacha, if the person placed them down, okay, and you can see usually if something had fallen or if it was placed. If it was placed, then makom is a siman, and then therefore, if I were to find your stuff that you placed there, no tela machris, I would have to announce it. That's only, by the way, if it has no identifiable features on it. If it does have a siman, this is going to perfectly match Rava, right? Even in public, he doesn't think it's going to get, right? He doesn't care if it gets trampled. He still thinks it's a siman. Once it has a siman, all the other factors are irrelevant. Doesn't matter if you dropped it. Doesn't matter if it was in the public. It doesn't make any bit of a difference, because it has identifiable features, which means you can always get it back, which means if I were to find it, I would have to announce it. Moving now to Amud Bet. Now we're going to go through a bunch of cases in the Mishna. This is much simpler. Machrozot shel dagim. So we have this string, and there's fish hanging down, like tied onto the string. Amai, lihabi kesher siman. Maybe the way you tied the knots of knotting the fish to the string, maybe that would work. So that would be an identifiable feature. Everyone ties their knots a little differently. To which they said, no, bikatra ditsaida. No, you did it the way the fishermen do it. There's a fisherman's knot. Everybody does fisherman's knots, and then it's not an identifiable feature. Everybody ties them like that. Right? Reminds me of whether, in scouts they always do these knots, in the army they always do these knots. There's special knots you learn how to do, and then everybody does them the same way. How about how many fish are hanging? Can't you use that as a siman? It must be that the amount is always the same, standard. This was the standard. The standard 10 fish for every string. So that won't help you. So now that they already raised this issue of binyan, they asked Rav Sheshet, binyan have a siman? Okay, we didn't really talk about this. They just kind of mentioned it. But is amount of something a siman? Can I say I lost 5, whatever it is, in the middle of the street? Can I get it back by number? Olo have a siman, or does it not work? So Amalahu Rav Sheshet Tanitua. Let's learn from here, following Tanaitic source. Matzak klei kesef uklei nechoshet. If you have a list of all different kinds of metal implements, okay, whether it's silver or copper, gastron shalaval, pieces of lead, kol klei matachot, any metal implements, harei ze lo yachzir. You don't have to return. Ad sheitein ot, either if you have some sort of sign, they use the interchangeable word to siman, some sort of something. Oh, or if you say I had 3.5 pounds of, okay, then you could. So comes Rav Sheshet and he says, look, the mishkal have a siman. If weight can be a siman, Mida uminya nami havi siman. So size, right? If you can tell the exact dimensions, or number, how many, should also be a siman. Chatichot shel basal. So now the Mishnah had said pieces of meat, yeah, you can take because there's no identifiable features. Amai lehavi mishkala siman. Didn't we just say weight could count? So why wouldn't weight count? B'mishkala deshavya. We're saying standard piece of meat, same weight. That's not going to help you. V'tahavi chaticha gufa siman. O de dafka o de atma. Maybe the cut of meat. Was it from the neck? Was it from the thigh? Milo Tanya, don't we see in a braita that it says, and now we're going to quote this long braita. We're going to deal with the first part right now, and then later we're going to go back to the second part. Okay, and we're going to get off topic. I mean, it's not off topic, but off of the meat specifically because of the second part of this braita. But right now we're going to say, matzah chatichot dagim, if you find pieces of fish, v'dav nashuch, or the fish had a bite mark in it, chayav lachritz, you have to announce it. So what do you see here? This is the first part of the braita. You see the chatichot of fish work, so wouldn't chatichot of meat work? What must it be? It's what part of the fish did you cut it from? Near the head, near the tail. Somehow you could tell by the cut. So that's the question. But let's just finish with the braita because they quote the whole braita. Chaviyot shel yain v'shel shemen v'shel tuah v'shel gorgot v'shel zeitim harei elu shelo. Okay, you have barrels of wine, of oil, of grain, of dates and olives. You can take them. Okay, we're going to get back to that. When you talk about cuts of fish, we're not talking about which part of the fish did you cut it from. We're talking about you cut the fish in a unique manner, a unique shape. Okay, when you cut the fish, normally you buy fish, right? If you buy, let's say, fillets of fish, so they come in a rectangular shape. So this time they made circle shapes, okay, which is very rare to see. That's when you'd be able to identify it. And how do we know that there's such a thing? Okay, this is going to be our reference to Purim in our daf today. He cut meat. Okay, here was the case. He wanted to send meat to his wife, but he sent it with a Gentile. And he was worried that maybe the Gentile would switch the kosher meat for non-kosher meat. And he wanted his wife to know that the meat that he sent was the meat that she was receiving. So he cut it in a triangular shape. That's what it reminded me of was Naaman, of Haman Tashet. He cut the meat in a triangular shape. And with that, it was identifiable as this is the same piece of meat that I sent. So what do you see? You could cut things in a unique shape, but that's not a usual identifiable mark of fish, of meat on the street. That you can't, we're not going to say, oh, it's identifiable whether it was cut near the neck or near the thigh, which part of the meat you cut. That's not an identifiable feature. Everybody cuts meat like that. That's not clear enough. Here we're talking about a unique way of cutting it. And that's what we talked about. The fish was a unique way. And that's why our Mishnah is just talking about a regular cut. And therefore it's not identifiable. You can keep it. Daikanami dekatani. We can even infer that for sure the fish was talking about this unique kind of way of cutting fish because it's listed right next to dag nashuch. Dumia de dag nashuch. It must be like a fish that was bitten. Shmamina, which is rare, right? So likewise, the way you cut it must be rare. Amar. Now, if already we mentioned this braita, now we're going to go into this braita. You can keep them. Now that braita contradicts a Mishnah that we're going to see later in the chapter. Hatznan, kadei yain, kadei shemen, chayav lachritz. You have barrels of wine, barrels of oil, you have to announce. So the braita says you don't, this one says you do. What's the difference? Amar abizera, amar Rav, manitim berashum. The Mishnah is talking about where you had this special seal on it. Okay, so now, Michlal de braita de patuach. Wait, if it had a seal and that was identifiable, what's the opposite? If it didn't have a seal, it was wide open. Okay, wait. Our Mishnah says if you find a wide open barrel, you can keep it. Okay. I don't need a Mishnah to tell me that. If you leave your barrel of wine uncovered, totally exposed, creatures are going to get in there. You're basically saying I'm throwing this in the garbage. Okay, so I don't even need a Mishnah to tell me that I could take that. Of course I could take that. So Amarav Shaya b'matzi. No, there's sealing and there's leaving it open and there's something in the middle, which is you kind of throw something on top to make sure creatures don't get in, but it's not sealed shut. Okay, and that's the difference between the Mishnah and the braita. Abaye Amar Filu Tema Yidividi Barashum. Abaye says I could even explain them both, assuming you do have a seal on both of them. Lo kashya kan kodem shniftuchu atzarot kan lachar shniftuchu atzarot. Once people start selling, there's seasons for the wine. Once people start selling the wine, then everybody's is sealed with this nice seal, and then it's actually not an identifiable feature. But if you did it much earlier than everyone else, then you can get it back by saying mine is sealed. as we see. What's nice about Metzia, which happens sometimes, so we've seen sections like this in the Gemara, where you have a lot of real-life examples, because this goes on all the time, as we've talked about, and here we're going to have examples from everyday life. So Rav Yaakov, he found this barrel of wine after already the sales were going. Onto the Kamei Abai, he went to Abai and asked, what do I do with this? Abai said you could take it for yourself, because that rashum is not identifiable because it's already after the market was open and everybody has the same one. So if it's lost, you can keep it. We're back to this makom. Is it a siman or is it not a siman? And you'll see why we're bringing this up now. Let's learn it from that source. Matzah chaviyot, right? The Mishna says matzah chaviyot shel yain v'shel shemen v'shel tfuah. Sorry, the braita. Matzah chaviyot shel yain shel shemen shel tfuah shel gorgot v'shel zeitim arei elu shelo. Now, isa kadatach makom abisiman l'chros makom. If makom, location, was a siman, then you should have been able to announce, I found the barrel of wine next to wherever, right? It doesn't move, it doesn't get kicked around, so that should work. So what do you see here? Makom is not a siman. Amar Rav said, no, you don't have to say that, because you could say, maybe it was found on the banks of the river. Why is that important? Well, how did they do trade with wine? They brought them on boats. Everybody unloaded their wine in the same spot. Location can't be a location when that's where everybody leaves it. So Amar of Mary, my time, Amar Rabban and Rava dinara loha siman, and he explains, why is this area not a siman? Because because you could say, I find this barrel near the water. You claim it's yours. I say, what do you mean? You could have left it. Someone else could have left it there. It could have been anyone left it there. That's not a siman. Some people say, and there's a bit of a debate how this is different. Some people just say he wasn't saying about the rakta dinara. He was just saying in general about leaving a barrel of wine, that location is never a siman. Amar of Mary, it's just a different version of Rav Mary. My time, Amar Rabbanim makom lo havi siman. Why did they say location is never a siman? In other words, where you left something is never an identifiable feature, because anyone could have left it there. Okay, and this sounds like it's a more general, not just by the water, but anywhere. Halu Gavra, again, we're going to have a case. He found pitch next to a wine press. So somebody found it. He comes to Rav. He says, can I take this pitch? And he says, sure, you could take it. However, this also you can imagine happening. But he was a little nervous. He felt like maybe the owner will come back for it. Maybe I shouldn't take it. Amarle, Rav said to him, go split it with my son Chia. In other words, I have no problem with this whatsoever. I'm even happy for you to give half of it to my son. Meaning, I really think you have no problem taking this. He was trying to encourage him. So then they say, Lema kasavar mar makom lo havi siman. Was it because he held makom as in a siman, and that's why? Amar of Abba, Rabbi Abba mishum yeush balim naguba. No, and this is always a problem. When you learn from a case, you have to know the details. He said it's because he was certain that the owners hityashu, they despaired. Why? He saw grass growing in the pitch. Now, he could tell that the pitch was really old and had been left there a long time. And when a certain amount of time passes and it's clear the owner's not coming back for it, then you can know that there's yeush and you can take it. Okay, last part for today. Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar Omer, my anaphoria. Now, okay, so let's just read Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar, if you remember. He came at the end of the Mishna and he said, Kol klei anaphoria ein chayav la'achlis. You have klei anaphoria, you don't need to announce them if you find them. What's my anaphoria? The Gemara asks. Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, again, language the Mishna uses that the Gemara is not familiar with. Kelim chadashim shalos vatan ayin. They're new utensils that people can identify by looking at them. Okay. Echidami, what exactly is this? If it has an identifiable feature, what's the difference whether you remember everything about it and can recognize it by sight or not, right? Kisvatana ayin, kilosvatana ayin mahavi. Who cares whether, right? I find something with an identifiable feature on the floor. I have to assume that the owner will come back for it. Shouldn't matter whether they can look at it and identify it or not look at it, right? First of all, they should know there's a siman. They know that the thing that they bought has something, right? It's obvious. It's a clear siman. Idelepu siman, kisvatana mahavi. If it doesn't have a siman, so if I find an item on the floor that has no siman on it, we already learned that I could take it no matter what. What's the difference whether it's a new vessel that you haven't yet recognized? It doesn't make a difference because, right? And that's basically they're saying, what on earth is this svatana ayin? Lo lam di'ipahu siman. It really has a siman. Nafkamin, I'm sorry, it really has no siman. So what's this svatana ayin? Nafkamin ala adure le surva merabanam b'tviyut ema. This is the whole thing about rabbis and tviyut ayin. What's tviyut ayin? That we allow Talmidei Chachamim, Torah scholars. We're going to get into the whole believability of Torah scholars starting at the beginning of tomorrow's stuff, but really at the very end here, but we'll stop before this. Torah scholars were really Torah scholars were believed. If they look at an item, they could say, I know that one's mine, even though it has no identifiable feature. Now, but that's not true if it's a new vessel that they wouldn't have enough time yet to be familiar with to know which one's theirs, which one's someone else's. So they're going to say like this, once they know it well enough, then we can assume that they can get it back. Oh, there was a little scratch on the side and I see it there. They might not remember. Scratch was on the left, but when they see it, I know that's mine because I recognize that. That's mine. But ki lo svatana ayin, what Rabbi Shimon ben Elazar is coming to tell you, if it's anaphoria and it's so new that lo svatana ayin yet, then lo kimle b'gavaya v'lo madrina le. Okay, so now the question is, when I find that item, how do I know what Talmid Chacham is going to claim it, and whether I know I need to return it, not pick it up, not? So they say that maybe we're only talking about a place where there's a lot of Talmidei Chachamim, or if you found it in the Beit Midrash, or something like that, where there's a lot of Talmidei Chachamim, then you would have to assume, again, it would depend on if it's so new that no one would even be able to identify it by looking at it, then no. So there's this unique halacha by Talmidei Chachamim that they can look at it, you can let them look at it. Normally we say, don't look, give me simanim. If you have simanim, great. Not otherwise, because we don't trust people. But Talmidei Chachamim we trust. We'll get to tomorrow what we don't trust them in, but what we do trust them in, and we'll see that. So, quick review of today's stuff. We started with the two machlokot of Raba and Rava and really focused in the end on the one about siman asoli dares. Is it a siman or not? So first we had to explain the alumot and the krichot according to each interpretation. That had to do with makom and siman asoli dares. Then we moved to maybe it's a Tanaitic debate. Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Meir. In the end, we defined their debate as something else, and we had two versions of what it could be and what it was in the end. In the end, we say their debate all has to do with the siman haba me'elav, right, where you don't necessarily know that it was like that. Then we went into the machrozot. We had a few extra things that Rav Zvid added at the end about the end of Amud Aleph, about when it's yeyush, what you say that it counts as yeyush. Then we went into the krichot and the reshut rabim, and depending on how you leave them in reshut yachid. Then we got to the machrozot of dagim, the chatichot of basar, and we asked some questions about that. We talked about minyan as a siman, and mishkal and midah, all those can count as simanim. And then we got to, once we quoted the braita for the basar, which had to do with the fish, then we got into the chaviyot of yain, and we brought some contradictions there and resolved it with depending on the different covers or the different seasons. And then we got to some other cases where people took items and did they have to return them or not. And then we went to the end of the Mishna about anaphoria. What is anaphoria? And then we got into this whole thing about tviyut ayin of Talmidei Chachamim. We'll continue that in tomorrow's daf. Wishing everybody a Shabbat Shalom and B'sorot Tovot and a happy Purim.